utmost responsibility and work together as was agreed by leaders during the G8 summit in June this year.
Faysal Itani is a fellow with the Atlantic Council's Rafiq Hariri Centre for the Middle East and joins me now from Washington, D.C. Nice to have you on the programme, Mr. Itani. What do you make of these comments being made by John Kerry, that he's absolutely certain the Assad regime were behind this attack and more evidence will be produced later?
Well, I think it's credible and authentic. I mean, you're talking about an administration that's been deeply hesitant to get further involved in Syria, much less carry out military strikes itself. So given that they are themselves willing to admit that they have solid evidence, or proof, if you will, that chemical weapons were indeed used, I think the threat is credible.
But if that's the case, what do you make then of Sergei Lavrov's position, the Russian foreign minister, saying that the Assad regime didn't do that? It's going to be very difficult to prove actually who launched that potential missile or missiles that may have killed so many people.
I mean, it depends how high you set the bar for proof. I think the Russians would understandably say that, because if they were to admit otherwise, then they would not be able to sort of stymie any resolution in the Security Council. But given the way things are going, they absolutely cannot lift that diplomatic cover on Assad. They do appear, though, to have resigned themselves to the inevitability of some sort of U.S. reaction. Given their statements earlier today, they were sort of saddened to see the U.S. moving in this direction, but more or less said that there wasn't much they could do about it.
We've been talking to our correspondents and many contributors to Al Jazeera throughout the day and past few days over this particular incident, and the issue of the position of the UN, the lack of a UN resolution would be useless in this particular case, and the US trying to gain consensus from its international allies to act. But when they will act is another question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think they're trying to get whatever consensus they can, really. To begin with, they need as much evidence, investigative evidence from the UN team as they can possibly get, and it makes sense to wait for that, more evidence to come out on that angle. On the other hand, of course, they have some allies that would quite likely back whatever operation they push in Syria. That includes the United Kingdom, France, probably Turkey as well, perhaps even Jordan, even though they've been hesitant till now. I think these allies are waiting to see if there is a real U.S. intent to go forward with these sorts of operations. And once they perceive that that's a credible threat, they will cast their lot behind it.
I mean, sorry to interrupt, you are actually in the American capital and you're gauging opinion, certainly with American nationals that you're dealing with. I mean, we've been talking over, certainly the past few days, about an apathy towards conflict. The Americans, certainly public, is very tired of having dealt with Afghanistan and Iraq, and there isn't really an appetite to go into another conflict, let alone Syria. Yusuf, have you... we may have just lost our guest there, Faysal Itani. We'll try and come back to him if we can later in the programme, but for the moment I think you got a general gist of what he had to say, and generally what most of our analysts have been saying about this particular scenario. We'll keep an eye on it here on Al Jazeera. Now, Palestinian negotiators have cancelled the latest round of peace talks with Israel after Israeli troops shot and killed